And I always admire it when they invite him other places, which tells me we have a preacher everybody wants to hear. And I like that. Let's look at chapter 2 of 1 Kings, and I want to re-investigate verses 13 and following, just to get us started tonight. This is the account, as we mentioned last time, when one of the sons of David comes to Bathsheba and asks her to ask Solomon if he, Adonijah, can have the girl Abishag, who was the heating pad for David. And David reads that correctly. It looks like that Adonijah thought he could usurp the throne anyway. And so I'll get into this family through Abishag. He uses Bathsheba to go to David and ask David for her. And according to verse 19, or asked Solomon for her, David is dead. Bathsheba goes to King Solomon, her son, for Adonijah, Hagiah's son, and her no relation to her at all, really, by blood. And she says to him, "Let Abishag the Shunammite," verse 21, "be given to Adonijah thy brother to wife." Solomon figures that out immediately. We're going to learn where he got this wisdom here in just a few verses. But he figures out Abishag has his designs again on the throne. Look at verse 22. King Solomon answered and said unto his mother, "Why dost thou ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also." My brother wants to usurp the throne. Even for him and for Abiathar. He also knows, Solomon does, that Abiathar is a wicked priest, and that Joab deserves death for what he did in murdering all of those folks in his lifetime. And then he says to Bathsheba, "God do so to me and more also." He's taking an oath. "If Adonijah have not spoken this word against his own life, my brother will be put to death." Like father, like son. You remember how many David ordered to be executed before David died? On his deathbed, David ordered the execution of Joab, Shimei, and others. Usually when a president leaves office in this country, he takes some and pardons them, but David decided he'd do something else. Pardon? Oh yeah, kill that one for me. "Now therefore as the Lord liveth, which hath established me and set me on the throne of David my father, and who hath made me an house as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death this day." One of David's warriors, Benaiah the son of Joiada, does what King Solomon asks and kills Adonijah. Abiathar the priest is handled a little differently, however. He's exiled to the hometown of Jeremiah, who will not be there then because Jeremiah was born a couple of centuries later. But Anathoth, he is exiled. He's taken out of the priesthood and exiled. Zadok will become the high priest in Israel to follow Abiathar. Abiathar had lined up with Adonijah. That was a bad thing to do for Abiathar. And he will eliminate the household of Eli as the priestly family. You remember Eli is the one who would not discipline his sons, and it's certainly the case that his people were not good priests. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, the murder or the putting to death of Adonijah and the exiling of Abiathar, Joab hears a rumor. It's interesting to me. Look at verse 28. It says in the King James, then tidings. That word in the Hebrew is breath. He heard a rumor. All he heard was a rumor, and it scares him to death. For Joab had turned after Adonijah, though he turned not after Absalom. And he runs, he flees. This is a military warrior who hears a rumor and runs for his life. And we talked last time about he tried to find sanctuary at the horns of the altar, probably the one that David had made in the threshing floor of Aruba. But there's no sanctuary for a murderer. You have to go to what? A refuge city. But the way he did it, it was not manslaughter, it was murder. So he has no sanctuary. And Benaiah comes. Go kill him, Benaiah. Same fellow that did in Adonijah. And then bury him, Benaiah, verse 31. But it always amazes me what Joab did. You would have thought he would have fought for his life. No, he ran like a coward, grabbed the horns of the altar, trying to hide himself away. I learned something about men by studying these texts. These priests, they're not any different from us. They have like passions, like desires. Just because they are priests doesn't make them pure. I noticed when I first started preaching that the brothers and sisters in the church started looking at me differently. Somehow I suddenly became a holy man. I thought maybe I should walk around like this a lot. You know, the Pharisees did that, and the Jews mocked them. They called them bloody-shouldered Pharisees. Because you walk around like that, you bump into things. I'm not a holy man. I'm just a man who preaches. We have preachers in this city who tell the congregations, we are the only man of God here, and we run things. We're in charge because we are the men of God. I went to a welcoming feast for an incoming preacher in this city. The mayor spoke, A.C. Wharton spoke, and they welcomed their new pastor to the so-and-so Church of Christ. The man of God, the holy man among us. Listen, anybody who puts his shoes on is just a man. That's all he is. All I am is the Christian who teaches and preaches. Don't think of me any more than that or any less. There's no difference between what I do and the fellow that gets the Lord's Supper ready. It's all necessary. I don't work for the brethren either. That's a misunderstanding of what I'm doing. I work for the Lord. You folks support me to do that. If you did not, have to find somebody who did. Yes, sir. I can't hear you. Who is it? Oh, Marvin. Yell, brother. I can't hear him. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Yes, sir. Galatians 1, 6 through 9. Oh, you're talking about Revelation 19. He said, stand up, John. I too also am a creature of God. Don't be worshiping me. My wife worships me, though. Yeah, everything she gives me is a burnt offering. Karen, if I want her to know I said that, I'll tell her. What'd you say? Oh yeah, last time I said that I like peanut butter sandwiches. I've learned to love them. Oh me. Abiathar teaches me, even a priest is just a man. And he is subject, incidentally, in this text, to the secular authorities. So am I. I actually had a sister ask me one time what it was like not having to pay income tax. I said, I don't know. I pay income taxes. You do not. You're a preacher. I said, they come for me first. Yeah. What is it that Bill Cosby said? They come for the little people first. Yeah. Or the ordinary people or something. Now, we've got another problem here with Shimei, verse 36. He's exiled on condition. And if he breaks the condition, as we noted last week, then he will be put to death. Unfortunately for Shimei, he broke the condition, and was put to death. Does anybody have a thought or a question or anything about chapter 2? And I'll leave it. I remember when Brother Curry taught us chapter 3 of 1 Kings, and the insight he had into Solomon here was amazing to me. Solomon does something here that was a sin. Right at the start of this chapter, look at verse 1. Solomon made affinity with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter. Why? To secure the alliance, the foreign alliance, military alliance, not allowed by God. Deuteronomy 17, 3 and 4. This was not allowed by God. Deuteronomy 7, 3 and 4, excuse me. In fact, this will be the first of 700 wives that he will take. He begins right here. And yet, in this chapter, he will pray a prayer unlike any prayer probably we've ever heard. It's interesting to me how the chapter starts, though. Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter. And it says here, he made an end of building his own house and the house of the Lord and the law brought into the city. He brings her home. Folks, this is not a Jewish girl. He's already violated the Scriptures and God's law. He's also, meanwhile, working on the temple, his palace, and the wall around the city. But since there wasn't a temple done yet, the people worshipped in high places. There you go with the thought that they were almost idolatrous. This Pharaoh, we know from history, was the last king of the 21st dynasty. 2 Kings 14:21. And here is Solomon making an alliance with him. The children of Israel went into Babylonian captivity, well, Assyrian captivity too, but especially Babylonian captivity with Judah because they had made these foreign alliances and were practicing idolatry. And Jeremiah said of them, they were so sinful they couldn't blush. Jeremiah 6:15. Can you imagine becoming a nation so sinful, so used to 700 wives and 300 mistresses, so used to idolatry, so used to foreign alliances, trying to protect themselves when God was the one that could have protected them? They turned from him and said, Egypt, help us, or Assyria, help us, or somebody help us. Some of these kings following Solomon paid tribute to these nations, trying to protect themselves from attack. It all starts with Solomon right here. I hope that his writing of Ecclesiastes was his book about repentance. I hope that. Because this man practiced some of the most evil things you can think about. And what's amazing is that in that context of what he's starting to do here, we have this prayer, which is amazing. Could we read that together? Let's read verses 5 through 15. IRS is calling. They want my tax money. Let's read verses 5 through 15. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give thee. What was he doing in Gibeon? That's where they made the offerings. There was no temple in Jerusalem. That's what it says. Verse 4. And Solomon said, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David my father great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. There's something else I've learned from this. I'm going to tell you something now you're going to have a hard time believing, but I'm not perfect. But I know God listens to me. And I think about Solomon here, and it gives me hope. You did a wicked thing, Solomon, and yet he's talking to God, and God's listening. You can never get so far away from God that you can't turn back. If I confess my sins, He's faithful and just to forgive my sins and to cleanse me from all unrighteousness, 1 John 1:9. He talks to God first about David, Solomon does. He said, He walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. I wonder if Solomon was being selective. David didn't always do this. You know, our memories of our parents are a little different from maybe from the way they were. But David was upright at the end. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. Wasn't Solomon born from fornication? Yet he says God gave the son to Israel. What? Bathsheba's son, yeah. Adultery, fornication, yeah. Oh, that's right. But Solomon is born of the same problem. Yeah, David didn't, that wasn't his first wife, was it? And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. You know what Brother Case used to say about this kind of thing? He said, I think God held his nose. To see all of this sin and still having to deal with these people, there's something behind this that we have to understand. What was God's purpose in Israel? Who is He bringing through that nation? He's got a different purpose. I really can't apply everything here to me, but this text does give me some hope. And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. And this is a wonderful admission. I am but a little child. Have you ever felt like that before God? I don't know how to go out or come in. Elders, that's a great prayer for you. We need some wisdom here, Lord, on how to do this. And I have a huge people I have to lead, verse 8. Wouldn't it be great if our presidents prayed this way? It would be wonderful. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people. Would somebody read for the class James 4, 2 and 3? Verse 4 if you'd like. Yes. Verses 2 through 4.
Ye lust and have not. Ye kill and desire to have, and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not, because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust. Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is an enemy of God.
This particular prayer of Solomon's sounds a lot like the publican that's mentioned in Luke 18, who said, have mercy on me, O God, I am a sinner. Solomon doesn't ask a thing for himself in this prayer. He doesn't ask amiss. He doesn't ask to consume it in his own desires. And because of that, the answer is tremendous. God gives him what God thinks he should have because of Solomon's attitude here, which amazes me given his personal life. But nevertheless, it's a great prayer. I have a huge number of people I have to lead, so give me an understanding heart to judge thy people. He wants to be able to judge between the good and the bad. For no one without God's wisdom is able to judge this thy so great a people. This prayer or speech pleased the Lord. And Solomon had asked this thing. Well, Solomon, you didn't ask for long life or riches or the death of your enemies. You asked for understanding. have given thee a wise and an understanding heart. James said, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally, and then he adds in the King James, upbraideth not. What's that mean? God doesn't give it to you and then expect you to do something with it. When God gives it to you, it's your gift. You do with it what you want. You'll be judged on how you use it, but it's your gift. He's not one who says, when I give you this, you have to use it in a certain way. It's yours. He doesn't upbraid. So if you lack wisdom, ask God, and then it will become yours. How do you learn that? Through experience and the Word of God. Lean not unto thine own understanding. You have to turn your heart to God. Proverbs 3:5. So God said, I gave this to you, Solomon, wisdom. Solomon probably wrote half of the Proverbs, especially Proverbs 8, which is all about wisdom. Somebody asked me one time, what's the difference between wisdom and knowledge? Knowledge is facts. Wisdom is to know how to use them, what you do with them. That takes experience. That takes knowing the Word of God. Isn't that why an elder can't be a novice? He has to have some wisdom about him. Then he said, but I gave you something else. Somebody quote Matthew 6:33 for me, one of you students. And all these things. He said, I'm going to give you wisdom, but I'm going to give you riches. Solomon, of course, became the richest man of his time. And if thou wilt walk in my ways, it will continue. And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. He had a vision. And there is an offering made once this prayer is finished. Does anybody have a birthday today? This week? Next week? Next month? This year? May 10th. Who? Anybody have a birthday? How many of you have gotten a birthday gift? Let me see your hands. You got a birthday gift sometime in your life. Come on, everybody should raise his or her hand. Gene never got a birthday gift. I feel sorry for him. You know, when Gene got his birthday gift, he looked at that beautiful package, threw it on the floor, and stomped on it. Bam! Solomon, I'm going to give you wisdom and riches. You know what Solomon did? He stomped on the gift. He made some choices that you and I would never want to make in his lifetime by his activities and his desires for his own pleasure. But initially, God says to us, here's the wisdom he had. You know this account. 2 ladies come with one baby. Verse 16. They are prostitutes, both of them. But one of them has a living baby. The other one's baby died in childbirth. Verse 17 through 19. And there are only 2 of us in the house, and one of these babies died. Maybe it wasn't childbirth. Maybe it was killed. And she says, when that baby died, she got up and took mine at midnight and took it to herself and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I got up in the morning to feed the baby, it was dead. But I looked at it and knew it wasn't my son. Now, they're telling Solomon this. And the other woman said, no, this is my son, the living one. And the dead one is her son. And they both telling this story to the king. Now, if you're a judge and you've got 2 prostitutes in front of you and they're arguing over a baby, what are you going to do? And he said, now, your son's living and your son's dead. No, she said, it's the other way around. They got to arguing in front of him. Verse 23. And the king said, bring me a sword and I'll just kill this baby and they'll both be dead. What did the real mama do? This is wisdom. She said, give it to her. Solomon said, give that boy back, or that baby back to the real mother here. Give it to her. What would a mother say? Then the king answered and said, give her the living child. She is the mother. Israel heard about this judgment and began to fear Solomon. For they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. So we have a king praying for wisdom. It's illustrated in his first court case as a tremendous moment. But I outlined Solomon's prayer just to think about it for a while. I'm a child, God. Except you become as a little child, you can in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. This task that's set before me, God, is just too great. You told me to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. I can't do that. Can you go to your neighbor, Keith? You think you can't go into all the world, but what about your neighbor? Maybe you're asking the wrong thing, Keith. The task isn't that great. You just talk to people as you go along. I'll help you. But you're going to have to study to get there. Well, I'm a child. Yes. And that's what makes it easy for you in the kingdom. Well, God, I need understanding. Well, read the scriptures then. Lean not to your own understanding, Keith, but trust in God's wisdom. And then he said, I want to know the difference between good and bad. Look at Hebrews 4 with me for a moment, and let's read from verse 12. Oftentimes folks will say to me, I don't see anything wrong with this. They're telling me the truth. They don't see it. Whatever they're doing, they'll say, I don't see anything wrong with this. I'm sorry, Hebrews 5. I gave you the wrong passage. Yeah. Well, I'm going to start reading from verse 12. For when for the time you ought to be teachers, you have need one teach you again, which be the first principles, this is the Old Testament, of the oracles of God. He's talking to these former Jews who are now Christians, wanting to go back on the law of Moses. He said, you don't even know the Old Testament. You have need of milk and not of strong meat. For everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness. He is a baby. But strong meat belongs to them who are of full age, even those who by reason of use, watch this, have their senses exercised to do good and evil. If you study the scriptures long enough, you find out what is wrong to do, what's right to do. You're able to discern good and evil. But folks say to me sometimes, I don't see anything wrong with that. They don't. They're not lying to me. The reason they don't see anything wrong, they don't have the understanding to discern between good and bad. They don't understand it. Young people often ask me, what's wrong with dancing? Concupiscence. I'm not allowed to have those feelings for any other woman but my wife. That's what's wrong with it. But many tell me, I don't see anything wrong in that. Of course they don't. They haven't studied concupiscence. They don't know what that is, which God does not allow in my feelings. And so I pray now that I will have this understanding. But how do I get it? Same way I get my daily bread for which I pray. I have to go and plant the seed and grow the wheat and take it to the mill and have him make a loaf of bread for me. Well, I have to study my Bible so I can have my senses exercised to discern good and bad. But I noticed something else about Solomon's prayer. It wasn't very long. T.B. Larimore, one time back in the 1800s, Theophilus Brown Larimore, called on a fellow to lead prayer, and Patsy, he prayed for 25 minutes. When he got done, Brother Larimore said, if we'd known you weren't caught up on your praying, we wouldn't have asked you to lead. A prayer does not have to be eternal to be immortal. There are only 65 words in the Lord's Prayer. Very short, very brief, to the point. And so Solomon's teaching me, prayer doesn't have to be long to tell God. God knows my heart anyway. He knows what I have need before I ask Him. In Solomon's family, there was a woman named Naamah. She gave birth to a boy named Rehoboam. You know who he was? Solomon's son, Rehoboam. He was the next king, wasn't he? And he will cause all kinds of problems. I take it that Rehoboam did not follow his father's advice and ask God for wisdom. In fact, he listened to the wrong people. Yeah. Now, I want everybody for next week to memorize chapter 4. Especially you, Hastings. Because this is a list of the names of Solomon's cabinet. They're even hard to read, let alone memorize. If we could just name them John and Henry, we'd be better off. Well, what you have here is the administration of Solomon. But look at verse 20. 4. 1 Kings. Yeah, we're studying 1 Kings. She was over in some other place there. Judah and Israel were many as the sand which is by the sea in multitude, eating and drinking and making merry. Oh, what a great time in Solomon's first few years. Peace and prosperity. He's got his cabinet in place. Everything's going great. And then, of course, lots of problems. I want you to notice something, though, about this group of people. According to one of these verses, verse 7, it took 12 officers or leaders to provide the food for one day for the king and his household, which provided victuals for the king and his household each month, his month in a year. So they had to do this for 1 month. So for 1 month, everybody went to Kroger's and got the food for Solomon's family and King Solomon. You reckon they had a food taster in those days? I don't know. He's going to wait until